in the heart of the Assyrian Empire, where stone lions guarded palace gates and priests whispered to gods for war and rain. A chilling mystery unfolded. The marble halls of Queen Shamuramat's palace glowed with candlelight and perfume. But one night, those halls turned into a place of silent screams and lifeless bodies. 100 young men walked into the queen's private chambers that night. Strong, handsome, unmarked, handpicked from across the empire. The next morning, not one of them walked out alive. Their bodies were found lying side by side, neatly placed across the cold stone floor, as if they were offerings, not people. No battle had taken place. No plague had struck. These men had not been criminals. They were guests of the queen, and yet they all died on the same night, inside the same room, in the most powerful palace in the world. Official records said nothing. Palace scribes wrote no explanation, but scattered clay tablets, broken stone carvings, and forbidden stories tell us something else. The night was not an accident. It was a ritual. Queen Shamuramat, a woman ruling in a world of brutal kings and silent queens, had power few women ever touched. After her husband, the king, died suddenly, she took charge of the throne on behalf of her young son. Many hated her for it. Others feared her. She wore the crown, but she needed more than a crown to hold power. She needed fear. She needed the gods on her side. And in the old beliefs of Mesopotamia, the gods listened to blood. Palace logs from that time show strange purchases, rare herbs like poppy and mandrake, known to make people sleepy or see visions. At the same time, the palace bought exactly 100 young male slaves. They were not laborers. They were described as beautiful, pure, untouched. At first, many thought these men were chosen for a special ceremony, something joyful or sacred. They were fed royal meals, bathed in oil, dressed in silk, and kept hidden inside a special wing of the palace. But no one was allowed to speak with them, and strange sounds were heard coming from their quarters, low chanting, footsteps late at night, and once, a scream quickly silenced. Something dark was happening behind those palace walls. To uncover what truly happened that night and why these 100 men had to die, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. Queen Shamuramat did not inherit peace the moment her husband died. Threats began to rise like storm clouds. Her son, the next king, was just a child. That made her rule weak in the eyes of generals, priests, and foreign enemies in Assyria. A woman on the throne was not just rare, it was dangerous. People whispered she was cursed. Others said she was a puppet. Shamuramat had to prove she was neither. The Babylonian armies gathered in the south and the east. Raiders from the Zagros mountains attacked border towns. Northern tribes mocked the idea of a woman leading Assyria. Inside the court, jealous nobles plotted in shadows. Shamuramat knew words and laws would not save her. She needed a message written in fear. The Assyrians believed the gods protected kings. So if a ruler performed great rituals, the gods would return the favor with victory and peace. Sacrifice was the oldest way to speak to the gods, usually animals, sometimes prisoners. But never like this, never at this scale. Shamuramat's plan was extreme, but it came from desperation. Her rule was a thin rope over a pit of knives. One wrong move, and everything, her power, her life, her son's future would be gone. In secret, she met with temple priestesses. These women were more than holy servants. They were trained in ancient rites, forbidden chants, and sacred illusions. They had the queen's trust and her silence. Together, they began to design a ritual no one had seen before, one that would blend love, death, beauty, and fear into a single night. From archives found centuries later, we know the palace started preparing months ahead. The young men were chosen carefully, all around 17 to 20 years old, none with scars, disease, or marks of punishment. Many were orphans or prisoners of war. Some may have even volunteered. Thinking they would become servants of the gods, they were brought to the capital quietly, given new clothes, new names, their old lives erased. the palace turned one wing into a golden cage. They were kept clean, fed richly, and given wine mixed with herbs. But they weren't allowed to leave. Guards watched their every move. Priestesses visited daily, teaching them strange prayers and dances. Whispers from old letters and foreign diplomats tell us the city noticed something strange. Locals saw the stars disappear behind thick smoke. Strange music floated from the palace late at night. Some said the moon itself turned red. The signs were there, but no one knew what they meant. Not yet. As the sun set on that final day, the entire palace changed. Servants were sent home. Gates were locked. Torches burned low in the halls. Only a handful of guards and priestesses remained. The marble floor of the queen's chamber had been washed with sacred oils. Strange symbols had been painted in red across the walls. Incense filled the air so thickly that breathing felt like drinking smoke. The queen prepared herself in silence. She wore the ceremonial robes of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. Her dress shimmered with gold threads. Her hair was crowned with a horned headdress, said to be the same shape seen on ancient statues of the goddess. Her eyes were darkened with kohl, her arms covered in silver and onyx bands. She did not dress as a queen that night. She dressed as a god. The young men were led in, 10 at a time. They were calm, smiling even, their eyes glassy from the drugged wine. They believed they were chosen for something holy. Some may have thought they would return with blessings. Others likely thought they would never return, but would become legends. They were taken to stations marked on the floor, circles drawn with ash and powder, each with its own pattern of symbols. The queen stood in the center, surrounded by priestesses, all of whom wore nothing but heavy necklaces and sacred charms. The room pulsed with the beating of drums, slow and heavy. At first, what happened looked like a ritual of joy. The young men were made to dance, chant, and drink. The priestesses moved around them, whispering sacred lines, touching their faces gently. But beneath the soft movements, there was something else. The queen watched them closely, not with love, but calculation. Then came the moment when joy turned to horror. The wine changed, the chants grew faster, the lights dimmed. According to the only eyewitness, a scribe hiding behind a carved wall vent, the queen gave a signal. The drum stopped. Silence fell like a knife. One priestess stepped forward, holding a dagger with a blade shaped like a crescent moon. She placed it in the queen's hands. What followed was not a frenzy. It was methodical, cold, ritualistic. The queen moved from one circle to the next, each act done with care, as if performing a sacred duty. The men, dazed and weak, barely resisted. Their bodies were laid down in careful lines, forming shapes only seen from above, symbols linked to death and rebirth in ancient belief. And still, no one outside knew what had happened inside. The palace remained silent till dawn. When the first light of day touched the palace walls, the gates remained closed. Inside, the queen's chamber was filled with stillness. The air was thick with the scent of blood, incense, and crushed herbs. The priestesses moved like shadows, their faces expressionless. They had seen too much, done too much. One by one, teams of servants entered quietly. They did not speak. They had been chosen not for their strength, but for their silence. Their task was clear: remove the bodies, wash the floors, burn the garments, and leave no trace. By midday, the room looked as it had the day before, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. The queen did not appear in public for several days. When she did, she looked calm, powerful, almost glowing. Ambassadors who met her after that night described her presence as overwhelming. One wrote, "She spoke little, yet we trembled." Another claimed that even hardened warriors lowered their eyes in her presence. No one dared ask about the missing men. The official story spread fast. The young men had been chosen by Ishtar herself, taken to serve as divine companions in the afterlife. It was an honor, the scribe said, a sacred gift. But behind closed doors, people whispered another story: a night of death hidden behind holy symbols. Foreign records confirmed the shift. Babylonian troops suddenly retreated. Enemy raids stopped. Distant kingdoms sent gifts without Being asked, fear had done what armies could not. The queen had turned ritual into weapon. Archaeologists today have uncovered a burial site near the palace with exactly 100 skeletons. All male, all young. The bodies were arranged with strange care, forming patterns in the soil. Bone tests show traces of the same herbs the palace had purchased. There were no signs of battle, no signs of decay from disease. All died the same night. Some skulls show small, clean-cut evidence of a sharp blade, not war. Others show nothing at all, suggesting poison or gas. A few had their arms gently crossed over their chests, like temple statues. This was not an accident. This was a message. Yet even with all this, the event remained a secret. For generations, records were destroyed, names were erased. Only bits and pieces survived, shards of clay, broken statues, hidden notes. But the truth, once buried, began to rise again. What kind of ruler chooses terror over trust? And what kind of mother sheds blood to protect her child's future? The answers lie in the next shadows of history. Shamuramat did not rule like other women. She ruled like no one had before her. Her rise to power came at a moment when the Assyrian throne was weak and the empire was full of enemies. But instead of hiding behind her son, she stepped into the fire herself. Her rule was built on fear and myth. After the night of the sacrifice, people began to speak of her in hushed tones. She was no longer just a queen. She had become something more half-human, half-divine. In a land where gods were everywhere, walking among men. This change was not taken lightly. The priesthood, once unsure about her, began to support her fully. Temples carried out rituals in her honor. Statues of Ishtar began to look more like the queen. In old carvings, Shamuramat stood beside gods, her body glowing with divine symbols. She had crossed the line between ruler and deity. But this transformation came with a cost. She could never go back to being just a woman or just a mother. She had become the symbol of power, feared, worshipped, and alone. Her relationship with her son, Adad-nirari III, also began to change. At first, he was a quiet child, raised in the palace under his mother's careful eye. But as he grew older, he started asking questions. He noticed the tension in the air, the silence in the halls where laughter should have been. He noticed how people bowed too deeply and left the room too quickly. Some say he found out the truth, that he learned what his mother had done to keep him safe. That realization built a wall between them. He still respected her. He still obeyed her. But something warm had disappeared. Shamuramat continued to rule for several more years. But her world grew smaller. She moved into a private palace on the edge of the city. Only her closest priestesses visited. She rarely appeared in court, yet no one dared challenge her. The memory of the night of the 100 lost lives was enough to keep rebellion quiet. Letters from foreign envoys during this time speak of her like a force of nature. To see her, one wrote, was to feel the breath of gods and the silence of death at once. People feared her, admired her, and wondered who she really was beneath the robes and the power. But the truth was locked away behind palace doors, where no light entered and no voices escaped. Only stone remained, stone walls, stone tablets, and the stone hearts of those who chose to survive at any cost. Long after Shamuramat's death, workers rebuilding old palace walls found something strange hidden behind a loose stone, a small sealed jar. Inside, they discovered a clay tablet, its surface filled with tiny marks, worn by time, but still readable. It was not an official record. It was a confession. The writer was a palace scribe. His job had been to record ceremonies, store orders, and track daily life in the royal court. But one night, he saw too much. From a crack in the chamber wall, he watched the queen's ritual unfold. He could not stop it. He could not tell anyone. So, he wrote it down and hid it, hoping someone, someday, would find the truth. The tablet described the faces of the young men as they entered, some nervous, some proud, all unaware. He remembered one in particular, a boy from Babylon, barely grown. He smiled at the priestesses, thinking he was part of something beautiful. When he realized the truth, he tried to escape. The queen herself ended his life with a dagger carved from stone. The scribe did not describe every detail. He said some horrors were too great to write, but he wrote enough to confirm what archaeology would later find: symbols on the floor, drugged wine, and rows of lifeless bodies laid out like an offering. At the end of the tablet, he wrote, "I no longer sleep. When I close my eyes, I see their faces. I see the queen's gold crown above their empty eyes. I write so the world does not forget." That tablet is now kept in a museum under heavy protection. Scholars have confirmed its age, its language, and its truth. It is one of the few first-hand accounts from within the palace, a voice that broke through silence. In 2019, another breakthrough came. At a site believed to be Shamuramat's private retreat, archaeologists found an underground chamber. Inside were more jars, many broken, some intact. Within them were letters written between the queen and her priestesses. Most were too damaged to read, but one stood out. It was a list, not of herbs or wine, but of names, 100 of them, each marked with a small symbol beside it, possibly to show order or rank. These were not just victims, they were people with names, with lives. Their identities had been erased from history, but this one tablet brought them back. One name, Ashaden, was carved with a deeper hand as if the writer pressed harder, holding back tears. This discovery changed how historians viewed the massacre. No longer a myth, no longer a rumor, but a real event with real human cost. News of what happened inside Shamuramat's palace didn't stay locked away forever. Whispers reached far-off lands, traitors spoke in secret, soldiers returning from Assyria carried tales that chilled the bone, and kings in neighboring kingdoms began to pay close attention, not in horror, but in curiosity. In the decades that followed, something strange happened. Rulers from distant cities began copying parts of Shamuramat's ritual. They didn't always call it the same thing. Some said it was a sacrifice to secure crops. Others claimed it was to summon rain or win wars. But the shape was familiar: young men, taken from their homes, killed in ceremonies too large to be called anything but slaughter. One king in the city of Kamish ordered 50 warriors to be sacrificed in a similar ritual. He believed the gods would protect his city if he showed them the same loyalty Shamuramat had shown. But his gamble failed. Within days, enemy forces breached his gates, and the people turned on him. He was killed by his own guards, blamed for angering the gods instead of pleasing them. Another ruler tried something smaller: 20 captives offered in a temple. But his people rioted, calling him a butcher. It became clear that Shamuramat's success could not be repeated. Her ritual had worked once, perhaps because it was so shocking, so massive, so new. But once others tried to copy it, the gods or the people seemed to reject it. Still, the story didn't fade, it transformed. In Greece, centuries later, historians told stories of a queen named Semiramis. She was beautiful, dangerous, and powerful. Some said she built Babylon, others said she conquered Asia. But in every version, one detail remained. Her lovers never lived past a single night. The tale had changed, but the truth still echoed. That one night, a queen crossed the line between ruler and god, and the world never forgot. Religious rituals across Mesopotamia also began to shift. The goddess Ishtar, once praised for love and beauty, became more feared than adored. Her temples filled with darker symbols. The priestesses, once symbols of fertility and wisdom, were now whispered about as witches. Stories spread of rituals done in secret, candles burned at midnight, and prayers spoken backwards. In old temple ruins, archaeologists began finding tools that looked more like weapons than ceremonial objects. Swords with runes, knives hidden inside altars, bones of young people, buried not in cemeteries, but beneath temple floors. Shamuramat had changed more than politics. She had changed the soul of an empire, and the shadows she cast reached farther than anyone expected. After the ritual, Shamuramat became more than a queen, she became legend. But legends come with a price. Her image spread across the empire in carvings, statues, and poems. Some called her the mother of Assyria, others, the bride of death. Her power was no longer questioned, but her humanity slowly vanished. She ruled for years after the massacre. No war dared touch Assyrian borders. No noble rose against her. Fear had built a wall taller than any fortress. But inside the palace, things began to change. Servants avoided her eyes. Generals stood straighter in her presence, but spoke only when spoken to. Even the priestesses who once surrounded her kept their distance. Shamuramat began to live in isolation. Her private palace was a world of silence and shadow. She spent hours in a room known only as the Chamber of Remembrance. Inside were 100 lampstands, each placed in perfect rows. They were kept lit day and night, their oil replaced constantly. Some believe each lamp represented a life taken that night, an eternal vigil burning in guilt or pride or both. No letters from Shamuramat reveal how she felt. The few writings that survive are formal, cold, and political. But those lamps spoke louder than any scroll. She remembered every day. As her son grew older, he took on more royal duties. Adad-nirari III was no longer a boy. He was a man with his own views, his own allies. Many believe he quietly resented his mother, not for ruling, but for how she ruled. The silence between them grew. When Shamuramat finally stepped down, she didn't stay to advise her son. She vanished from public life, retiring completely to her private estate. The priestesses who had taken part in the ritual stayed. With her, they aged together in secret. Some say they formed a quiet cult bound by what they had done and what they could never say. After her death, her son began removing traces of her rule. Statues were taken down. Inscriptions were rewritten. Her name faded from the official records, but the people still whispered, "The queen who danced with gods, the woman who made the walls bleed." Ironically, by trying to erase her, her son preserved her, because myths survive where records fail. And Shamuramat, queen of blood and silence, became immortal not by choice, but by consequence. Though Shamuramat had passed into death, her legacy refused to rest. In temples once dedicated to Ishtar, murals of love and life were painted over with scenes of fire and sacrifice. The goddess herself seemed to change in the eyes of her followers, no longer just a symbol of passion or fertility. Ishtar became a figure of wrath, of transformation through pain. Priestesses of Ishtar, once respected across Mesopotamia, gained a new reputation. They were seen as keepers of dark knowledge. Some rulers tried to ban them. Others sought their secrets. In cities far from Assyria, rulers began inviting former Assyrian priestesses into their courts, hoping to learn the ritual that had turned a collapsing empire into a force of fear. Clay tablets recovered from Egypt and Anatolia show that copies of the Queen's formula had spread across regions. These were not religious scrolls. They were instructions lists of herbs, methods, and steps, ancient chemistry born from horror. Some of these texts included sketches of hidden gas chambers, pipes built into walls, and powders that could cause madness when burned. Modern researchers believe the massacre may have included more than knives and poison. In the walls of the Queen's chamber, small holes lined with resin were discovered. Tests showed traces of chemicals used to release gas when heated. The victims may have been breathing death even as they believed they were rising to divinity. Worse still, this knowledge didn't die with Shamuramat. A hidden science grew within royal palaces, passed in secret, used when needed. Generations of rulers quietly trained court poisoners and ritualists, using her methods as tools of control for centuries. Power remained wrapped in incense and illusion, but no secret lasts forever. Over time, stories of the massacre transformed again. In distant lands, plays were written about a queen who took lovers only to kill them by morning. The horror became entertainment, the truth became legend, the victims became forgotten. But bits of truth kept rising. Archaeologists found burial sites with patterns that matched the Assyrian chamber, Others found names carved into walls, lists of victims etched in shaky hands. Some temples even display forbidden artworks hidden behind false panels, women with horn crowns, standing over lifeless bodies, eyes painted to follow the viewer. History tried to forget, but the earth remembered, the stones remembered, and one by one, those memories returned to light, demanding to be seen, demanding to be heard. In 2021, the Iraqi government made a decision. On the edge of an old ruin, near where the royal palace once stood, they placed a stone. A simple marker. It read in both Akkadian and Arabic, "Here lie 100 sons of Mesopotamia, victims of power's hunger. May their memory outlive their murderer's glory." It wasn't much, but it was something. The site, quiet for centuries, began to feel different. Visitors reported strange sensations, cold air on hot days, birds avoiding trees nearby, an eerie stillness in the evening. Scientists brushed it off as suggestion. Locals weren't so sure. DNA tests on the remains uncovered something deeply painful. Among the dead were brothers, two sets, likely sold into slavery together, chosen for their shared beauty, dressed alike, killed alike. History had turned their bond into a symbol of tragedy. These weren't just nameless boys. One tablet preserved their names: Ashaden, Nabashir, and Lilbani, Shamash, Ibni, each name a life, a voice, a dream cut short for someone else's ambition. Shamuramat died peacefully in her bed, her name sung in songs for years. Her son ruled a little longer, but the dynasty she had fought to save collapsed within a few generations. The empire, once feared across the world, fell to enemies who saw no God in its crumbling towers. The true cost of her ritual was not just 100 lives. It was the soul of a kingdom. After Shamuramat, Assyria was never quite the same. Fear replaced faith, ritual replaced reason, and rulers forgot that power without conscience always eats itself in the end. Yet the story survives, not because of the queen's power, but because someone risked everything to record what happened. A scribe who couldn't sleep, a priestess who asked forgiveness, a stone that still stands. Shamuramat became legend, but not the one she wanted, not the mother who saved her son, not the queen who protected her land, but the woman who wrote her name in blood and was cursed to be remembered for it. And the 100, they remain not as forgotten slaves, but as voices that echo across centuries, proof that even in the darkest acts, history leaves a trail, and someone, somewhere, will always find it. To honor them and to never repeat their fate, subscribe and click the notification bell. Let their memory stay alive through those willing to hear.